This series of author interviews is brought to you by Leisure Press and the Book Reality Experience, turning writers' dreams into book realities.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another of our Book Realities, our interviews with independent authors series. And this time round we're joined by Mark Fryday. G'day Mark, how are you?
Hello, yeah, I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Now, for anybody that isn't aware of what Mark Fryday does with regards to being an author, tell us all about yourself. Where are you talking to us from?
So I'm talking to you from St Ives, but not the one everyone knows. There's another one in Cambridgeshire. I have to keep explaining that to people to think I've come a long way in any particular day. So we're about 60 miles north of London, quite near Cambridge, and it's a nice little market town. Yeah.
So is that the St Ives of the rhyme, or is Cornwall St Ives?
Well, they do say that around here, that it's definitely us. They're quite keen to lay that claim to fame, if you like. And I think the other St Ives is quite happy to let us do it. So, yeah, I think that's ours.
Oh, very good. So you have written a couple of books, but you've also written other things from books. But let's talk about your books first. What are your books about, and what are they to do with?
I've got two books called, it's in the series called Tales from the Red Line being the pub in which the book's set. And it's called the Red Line because that's the most popular pub name in England. And I wanted it to feel like the reader was in their pub. It was going to be a typical place. So it's not really described in great detail. It's what I want the reader to sort of imagine it being their pub, either the one that I actually like or one that they imagine they wish they had. And there's two books that are set there. So really the pub is the stage. It was kind of like the first idea I had to sort of write. I was actually sitting in a pub thinking, what should I write next, And I wish I could tell you that it was just this light bulb moment that happened immediately, but it was probably about 4 pints later where I thought, I could write about a bit, because I was hearing things like in the background, sort of great stories coming out. I thought, I should just I could write about this. But after a while, it's sort of, it's okay to sort of write about or in a pub, but about what? So it's just the stage. So even though I do make a play on it, there's lots of there's a lot of love for the British pub and that institution, and also explaining it, getting into all that in the books. But it's not really what they're about. Each one of them has a central spine okay, there's the stage. Here's this guy, that man down the pub. That's a quintessential figure in British society, and what's happening with it, and that's the important thing, really. So maybe the pub and the drinking idea, all that, it is important because in many ways it's a love letter to this sort of great institution, but it's not the reason we're here. We actually, as you read the books, you sort of find out what's going on in the lives of the people there, and that's the important thing.
You said they're a love letter to the pub. I find the first book especially is the main character's father has got dementia.
Yeah, so that's the spine of the first book. So once we're really in the pub and meet this guy, what's happening with him, that's happening with him, and we explore that, yeah. And
it turns out to be a love letter between fathers and sons. I find it really poignant because it's a very British issue. Well, I don't know if it's very British or not. I watched the rerun of Ted Lasso. I watched Ted Lasso again over the last couple of days, which I find the writing superb. But the British characters, the American characters, especially the male characters within it, all have issues with their parents, usually the fathers and sons. And it reminded me of your book, or your book reminded me of it, because your central character and his father, how that central relationship is dealt with by him going down the pub and having a drink with his mates is really well handled. And that was in the first book. So the second book, without giving away too many spoilers, deals with what?
So the central spine of that, although it is a sort of a continuing story to a certain degree, although I did have a sort of a thought experiment, like if you read them backwards, like a different order, would that still work? And I thought, yeah, it would actually. So, but that's kind of like an accident, I guess, more than a design. But the central theme of that book is really some mental health issues, male mental health issues, really. I wanted to get into that. I was just sort of looking, it's also making me think, well, if I do write another one, what will be that central spine? That's kind of what I'm missing at the moment, I guess. But I think both those issues of aging parents, dementia, and then particularly male mental health issues around emotional repression and just not talking about things. So big topics at the time, say on talk radio, which is a good source of inspiration. And they just sort of came out of me. It was like, yeah, that's, you look across, if you're in the pub and you look across to someone there just sitting there, and you can like imagine what might be happening to that person's life. Those two things kind of came out as being, yeah, these are things that we should be writing about and shine a light on. Because I think the whole reason behind the books is trying to humanize that quintessential person down the pub. And it could be a cafe or wherever you might see people just sitting there on their own. I think the temptation is to think that their problems are less weighty than yours, and that you are a more rounded person than they are. I mean, it's almost like you can make your problem seem massive, and theirs will be, they'll be okay. I'm sure they'll be fine, even if they look sad. Be like, they'll be all right tomorrow. Just imagine that. Kind of easy to do that. So I wanted to sort of like the books to be a counterpoint to that, of going like really getting to know this guy really well, and to flesh out all of his the pleasures and the pains of his life, to be like feel real and full, so that next time you see someone out there in the pub or the cafe, you feel a bit more like a connection to them, although you feel a bit more, even if you don't say hello to them at all, but you sort of look across and you think they're as real as me. That's it's sort of call to empathy, if you like. That sounds a little bit overblown because it's actually a bit more fun than that. But that was really the driving force behind why write anything. What would be the point? What would I want people to feel at the end of it? I want them to be entertained for sure, and maybe learn a little bit about this culture. But I also would like to feel that I move people in a particular way, and we can learn something a little deeper about ourselves through it, even though it doesn't feel like a deep book. It tries to do that in a natural way.
Well, I've got to say, from the first time I read the first book, I mean, there are laugh out loud moments in it. So it's not, it does deal with serious subjects, but it's not doom and gloom. It's not a psychological.
It's like a night out with your mates, basically. You go over those peaks and troughs of the night,
And it's funny. And there are moments where you identify that, oh God, I was that man in the pub at some point before, before his mates turn up. You're sitting on your own in a pub and you think, yeah, I've been there, I've done that. So the first one came out around about the same time as I first became aware of the RUOK movement. And the second one came out at the first time that I became aware of the campaign against living miserably, CALM. Now, you got involved with both of those, didn't you?
Yeah, there was St. Ives had a they got together with CALM to try and create a calm town. We'd sort of formalize a series of events and regular events within St. Ives itself to be a safe space for people to come and talk. There were some initial meetings around that and see what ideas we could do, things like walks and cafe things. I was trying to get something set up to have sort of regular come talk to us tables in pubs, but never really got that off the ground. I think people were a bit worried about doing that in pubs. So I don't know why, but that isn't something that sort of came out through CALM. So they do other things in the town. Of course, the CALM nationally does a lot of things, but the idea of the calm town, I think, will become a wider event, not just in St. Ives. I mean, it's interesting that I come from the northeast of England, and even though I've lived in London since I was 18, and then St. Ives after that, the idea of creating a group to make your town friendly and welcoming is quite alien to where I came from, because that's what it is. Everyone's like, no, not everyone, but that's basically how towns work in my part of the country. So it seemed odd to me that there was people trying to sort of formalize it and create things to force this sort of friendliness into a town in southeast of England, when a lot of places think, well, we already do that. That's how we are. So
we are.
I think actually
we are friendly.
Yeah, I think actually genuinely that there was big cultural differences in different parts of the country. I've lived in various parts of the country, and you do feel them. And St. Ives is somewhere in the middle, I would think, of being, somewhere like Newcastle being really, really friendly, London being terrible, terribly lonely place to be if you don't know people. And St. Ives is sort of somewhere in the middle. And I found out actually when I moved here that no one really would come up to you and be friendly with you. But if you got all northern on them and were friendly to them, they'd be quite happy with it, So they're sort of like in the middle. But it can be a bit exhausting if you're not having your best day and you've got to make the effort all the time to sort of get something going. And I guess what Calm Town would help do is that if you weren't feeling, you could make that push to make something happen, you could go to one of these events and someone would be there to, be that person for you.
And we should say that I lived in St. Ives for a long time, and the people are wonderful. They're not aggressive. They're not friendly. It's just the difference between, I guess, Northern Ireland and Newcastle, where you're walking down the street and complete strangers are going, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? How's things?" And you can strike up conversations all the way down to London, where if you try and strike up a conversation on the tube, people will look at you like you're an alien. And you're right, St. Ives is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So St. Ives is somewhere in between. Well, that's where movements like that can benefit people who do need, who haven't got that push to generally or on that a given day. And perhaps when you're feeling at your lowest, you don't have that push, and you do need someone to sort of come to you and help you. And, that can provide a space where that's more likely to happen.
Very good.
But yeah, but it's an odd concept considering what I was used to and where I came from, and of having to sort of formalize that. But having lived in London for like 15 years, I can see that there's definite need for it in other places. In the books, in a different way, that they highlight that, but also they strike out the importance of these places. So a good pub is one where you can go on your own, and most of the time you'll end up striking up a decent conversation with someone. And it's very strange how some pubs do that and others don't. And it could be the culture of the landlords. It could be just the pure shape of it, or the location, the type of people that go there, the things they sell. All of these things will sort of mold together into one of like, is this going to be, a good friendly pub or not? And there were pubs in St. Ives that I like, but some you only ever go to if you bring your mates, because if you go there on your own, you will stay there on your own. No one will talk to you. Until after like maybe 4 hours and everyone's a bit drunk, and then you might get a conversation. Well, that's a bit of a wait. But there are other pubs where you can go in and something will happen 9 times out of 10. And I wanted to talk about those places because they exist everywhere, and they're already a resource to get people talking and deal with that loneliness. It's great that Calm Town and the St. Ives are doing what they're doing, but we've already got a lot of that, even in the less friendly parts of the country, because a good pub is a place where people can find that sanctuary and battle that loneliness. And they're really important. Of course, they're under threat as well. So places like that.
So when you were saying that you came from the Northeast, were you always a writer in the Northeast? Did you go to London to be a writer, or what's your career pathway?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that, so I was thinking about that before over breakfast. Do you know what? At school, the thing I loved doing the most was about in English, when you were given I think we called them essays at the time, just a remarkably dry word for considering leaps of creative fantasy, where you just got given a line or a phrase or maybe a very short premise, and like off you go with it, and then you would write that up. And I was always very concise in my schoolwork, just want to get it out of the way. But these, I would just write, and I would, double the length of whatever else I was doing. Loved doing that. So it's kind of like, it was quite obvious that I should be a writer or keep up with the writing. But I must say, I didn't get any encouragement. I got a lot of good marks, and then that's it. And I went on this wild flight of fancy for one essay, and I was actually pulled up in class, and it was read out as a ridicule of, don't do this, this is too much. And this, basically, I was writing about this guy who's just seeing things. There's a mental health thing probably before I was thinking about mental health as an issue, but he just didn't get it. And then rather than talk to me about it, he decided to humiliate me in the class about it, which I thought was a really rotten thing to do. I sort of batted it off at the time, but I think it must have really sunk into me. And I didn't really, when I left school, I didn't do any writing. I mean, one of those reasons, I was having a lot of fun in London, I guess, but also I was in a band, so a lot of the writing went into songs. So for quite a long time, I wrote a lot of songs, performed those. And that's sort of I suppose the creative element is like a valve. I've got to let the pressure out and write something. And it took me, but I think that's sort of, when it comes to writing a longer form story, I think maybe that school experience, it's sort of still hanging around me. It took quite a while to get that out of the system. And I think I just needed a little push. And I had co-written a sitcom script with a friend because he wanted to do it. And he did most of the writing. I helped, but that sort of got me thinking, I could do this. When we finished that, it was that moment I was in the pub thinking, right, what we're going to do next? And we thought, well, we'll each do our own things. We had our own ideas, but we would support each other and swap ideas, and be that sort of second reader sort of thing. And that's when I was just listening over, hearing in the pub, and I thought, well, I could get to, write what you know. And I thought, well, I know this culture quite well. And I just started I didn't really have an idea in mind what I was going to do with that at the time. It could have been a script, but I just started collecting stories. I would just get your phone out, write everything down, because there's one thing you can guarantee: that story you're going to remember the next day. You will not remember that, especially if you're at the pub. So write it down. You get it, write it down. And I had all this stuff, and I thought, oh yeah, this is a novel, in the making. And that was that moment I thought, right. So it was almost like in stages. I sort of came from writing smaller pieces to right, this is my time to write the novel. I got a little bit stuck. I think I got a couple of chapters in, thought this is doing all right. And then I got that moment. Maybe you've had this where you see the end of the book and it's too far away and it's too big, and it gets oh God, I'll never make that. And then I was talking to another friend about all this, and just sort of came up with very sensible advice of just do one chapter at a time. You can do a chapter, can't you? So yeah, I'll do a chapter. And of course, once you've done, however many, 12 for me, maybe 20, you have got that book. But if you looked up and saw, to try and get to the end, it's no. And once I'd done that once, I knew I could do it. So the second time around, the second book, it did take me longer, but I was much more confident that I would get there. But I think with the first book, you never know you're going to get there until you literally have got to the end, because you might fall at any point. I don't know if is that something that other writers have felt, or... My
first book, I got halfway through the second part of it and ran into a problem, but that was more about me procrastinating, about not being able to get to the end. When you've written the second book, though, I thought there was going to be a third, but then of course we ran into all sorts of issues like pandemics, etc. But before we leave the books, there's one thing that you do within the books which is a little quirk, but it's to do with the real ales of the English pub system.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because it's a bit different now. But one of the having when I've travelled to different parts of the country, there tends to be like one or two beers that you can have, and then in England, Britain, there's dozens and dozens of choices. Now, this isn't really true anymore. Actually, things have moved on, so that the idea of a craft beer and small breweries is global now. It's an amazing thing. But about when those books were set, one of the things about the pub, you could go in and you would find something you'd never seen there before. They might never see there again, and you could drink it and enjoy it. And there was probably not much point knowing much more about it because it was going to be a very fleeting relationship. And they would all have very strange names because it sort of come out at you. And I wanted to, I sort of, the creativity of that, of the naming of these beers was good. And I sort of had in my mind that, well, I don't really want to use real ones. So I'll name my own. And then sort of the self-confidence comes in, or lack of rather, comes in and go like, well, there's been like thousands of breweries naming tens of thousands of beers for years now. Like, can't be any names left, can there? And then I thought, as I was just, whenever I was just writing, I would say like, right, he's bought a pint of, don't stop, just keep writing. And then you can always change it later. And I rarely did, just whatever popped out in my head. And it was sometimes, it was never on the nose to do with the scene we're in, but it's more like a little askance sort of reference to it. I mean, there's one of the more obvious references, I guess, was that he orders a pint of Dutch courage because he is going on a date later. So that's kind of one of the more obvious ones. There's loads. But I had fun with them. Yeah. So there must be dozens of those in the book. And I actually, a friend of mine offered to check them all on Google and see if any of them were actual beers. And there were none. It was all... I didn't have any copyright issues whatsoever. It was quite a relief. That was great.
Yeah, they made me chuckle as I went through the book. They're really cool.
I did enjoy that. Yeah. So it's something. Yeah, the beer drinkers around who've read this tend to quite enjoy that. I almost wish they could have a pint of that, but of course they can't because
as long as they don't go into pubs asking for them.
You know. They'd be sadly disappointed. But maybe I should open a brewery and start making some of these. But he would always say, as well as the name, he would always say how strong it was. This is like a mental quirk of Dan, the character. He would always tell you that was important to him, how drunk or not that was going to get him. I did enjoy that. And when I came up with a name, I don't know where they came from. They just sort of pop up in the moment. When I came up with a good one, I always felt quite satisfied, almost as satisfying as writing a good scene in a perverse sort of way. I was just like, yeah, that's a good name.
So you said that you got to about halfway through and then you ran into a bit of a problem and then you took it chapter by chapter. And the fact that the beer names popped into your head by inspiration, I'm assuming, therefore, that you're a bit more of a pantster rather than a planner with regards to where your novels are going?
Yeah, somewhere in between, I guess, but probably nearer the pants than the plan. So there is a spine to the books of like, I want to talk about certain subjects, and I know a few key things are going to happen. But how we get there and how an actual scene will develop around that, I tend not to have any idea or want to have any idea. It's odd when you're in the right space, you're sort of writing this and you go like, right, in this, so let's say Dan's in the park meeting his dad, and I need to say a couple of things in this chapter, and that's about it. And I've already planned, that is probably the extent of the whole book being planned, in the sense that I know each chapter is going to have a couple of things in it. And that's probably about it. And of course, some of that might even change as you go through and come up with something better. But, there is a plan, but it's quite a small one. And then how they sit down, how they meet, what they talk about to get there, no idea. And you just head off. And you've got a couple of turns to make, and that's it. And how do you get there? And that's how it really just came out. You stick yourself in that place and imagine it and keep writing. I think my fingers work about the same pace as my brain, or similar. So that's quite useful. So it also you don't sort of get ahead of yourself or behind yourself, and it kind of can flow quite naturally. I guess I never thought about that before, really. That's probably quite useful. My typing speed's about the right, not very fast, but about the right speed for the ideas coming out, which is quite useful. I was going to say the frustrating thing about that is if you're not in that zone, there's nothing coming out. So you do sort of rely on something you can't entirely control. It's a bit of a shame. But yeah, when I was in that zone of writing the books, it would just came out.
It's interesting. When I was asked how I came up with mine, I said it was more like growing a strawberry plant. I had a framework and I had a couple of touch points that I knew that I had to hit. But the actual shape of the final plant was all over the shop. It went on its own, but they did stick to the points. They ended up at the right places, but it grew in its own design. So after you'd finished the second book, I thought that there was going to be a third, but we ran into a strangeness called a pandemic. Yes. And I started seeing you doing back to the music side of life. You were writing a musical.
Yeah. So, I mean, on my website is the first page of the third book. And we do know there's a slight spoiler, and I won't go further. It's not really a spoiler. But we do sort of, I know where Dan is and what he's doing. But what I don't have is that spine. Like, what's happening in society at the moment that I want to put in this situation and talk about? And I don't really have that at the moment. To be honest, that's the thing that's stopping me writing the third book more than anything. It's like, what do I want to get into? And I haven't found that subject that I'm going to, I'll fall in love with and say, all right, I'm really going to be energized to do this. And talking of energy, COVID hit me pretty hard, and I had brain fog for a while. I've still got the fatigue following it. And that, especially with my writing style, relying on things sort of coming out magically, it didn't for a long time. And I found it quite difficult. And the idea of getting through that novel, even if I get the idea, it was a little more daunting than, say, the second one would have been. But I think if I do get the idea, I will be back into that. And I do want to revisit that again. But I do, first of all, need the idea, and I do need a little bit more energy. But I think one chapter at a time, that's okay. So instead, I started writing a musical with a friend of mine. I don't particularly like musicals. I do like mine, by the way. I don't like, a bit biased, but don't like musicals. But again, I was down the pub, and I do things outside of the pub, by the way. I'm not there all the time, but some of the more interesting things happen to me down there. And a friend of mine came up to me, and I was in that sweet spot of 2 pints. See, if I haven't had 2 pints, I won't be drunk enough to entertain your silly ideas. But if I have more, then I can't be expected to confirm whatever I agreed to the previous night. Within that sweet spot of 2, he comes up to me, Chris Lewis, and says, would you like to write a musical? I've always wanted to write a musical. And he'd read my books and he really liked them, and he thought that they would make a great musical. I'm not sure that's true, but just that sort of style and the realism and the look at society was something he thought, well, I could write a musical around something like that. And so, like I said, he caught me at the right moment. I went, Chris, I don't like musicals. He went, yeah, but do you want to write one? I went, yeah, all right then. And then we it turns out we have a great writing relationship together, and we sat down and thought, well, I was quite challenging. I thought, well, why are these people bursting out into song? This is ridiculous. But generally, I thought, well, why that? And of course, he's quite steeped in that culture, and he would sort of try and look at the best ones and why that happened. And we came up with the idea of like I write a lot about emotional repression in the English, British in particular, and I thought, well, this is a good fertile ground for a musical, because the script, the spoken words they can describe what everyone sees and experiences externally. Like, this is how these people act and operate. The songs are what's going on inside. That's really happening emotionally to them, which may or may not be shared to the other. Some are entirely internal, some are in a grey area in between about how much of this song is everyone else experiencing. And so that sort of clicked for me. Okay, that's why you would have a musical, right? Now, most musicals don't justify themselves or even want to beyond this just entertaining, but I wanted to go a little bit further than that. And so we came up, right, okay, so we've got, where can we express emotional repression? Well, probably a family. Okay, let's have a family, blah, right. And these things sort of, each idea begat the next one in the structure. Once you have a family, what position should they be? We didn't want anything like awful happening to them, or because we wanted this to be, we want people who were going there to go like, oh yeah, we're a bit like that, you know? And as soon as there's a car chase or a murder or whatever, then people could go like, oh, we're not like that then. And then can stop learning or stop empathizing with peace. So we wanted it, though there is things do happen. There is plot. I'm not totally averse to plot, by the way. There is some plot in it. It's not outlandish, so people can still sort of relate to it. And so we have a family. They're all going through changes. So it's sort of sparked by the father's early retirement, and the kids, being their age, they're teenagers, they're going through changes, and they're sort of like quite socially conservative, and so they've always done the right thing, kept their nose clean, as a generation that the parents have. And they have the ability to change and sort of really think about, well, where did I get them? And they're not very good at telling each other how they're going through all of these changes and what the effect it's having on them. They're just sort of bouncing and scraping off each other, not understanding each other at all. And there is a song right at the end of the first. We've got a song called "Why Shouldn't It Be My Way," and they're all singing it. They all get a verse each. And then they all sing it at the end, why shouldn't it be my way? And none of them are listening to each other. Just there's like a separate spotlight at each time. Like, I've done this, you've done that, this is my turn, this is why shouldn't it be my way? And they all sing that, but none of them have heard the other one's position and don't get it at all. And so it's just the breaking down of those barriers is what the musical's about. So we leave it. This is a tightrope. I mean, you must get where you get certain plots where they think like, this is a great plot, but it's causing me problems because if I go this way, it won't work. And if I go that way, it won't work. It's got to be right in the middle. And it was one of those, like we wanted to, it's a musical. We have to have people leaving happy, right, at the end. But then we don't want to go like, well, tell you what, why don't you all sit down and talk about your problems and everything will be fine. Well, that's not it either. That's not what we want to say. It's not really a useful thing to say either. So we have to find this sort of middle way where they do confront a certain something and they does open their eyes a little bit and it has improved things a little bit, but there's a lot more to be done. And that's kind of where we end up. And we kind of thought that if we get this right, I think we have, is that the people who see that layer underneath of what's going on in the family can get that subtlety and feel quite, fulfilled by that. But the people who are just coming in for a bit of a jolly in a musical will just see that, oh, they're getting on better now. Great. And there's a nice big showstopper song at the end. And they'll walk out happy, basically.
So where is it with regards to production?
Yeah, so we've done the script and the songs. We workshopped it earlier this year with a few local actors and a few minor tweaks to the script through that. We got a good idea about staging and blocking what areas we needed. And what we ended up doing, shortening a lot of the songs as well, because they sounded good in them like on their own, but when you sort of put them in a scene, it's like, oh gosh, that song's longer than the rest of the scene. It doesn't work pacing wise. So we've done all that, and so there's a couple of angles really to go for. We've got it as a pack of sound files and the script that we can give out to theatre groups, and it's just a question of finding someone who wants to put that on. So we're sort of looking around to see if anyone wants that. It's remarkably easy to stage, and we wrote that specifically for it to be an easy to stage. So contemporary sets, very few sets, clothes, whatever you come in, basically, and only 5 people in the cast. So a lot of people should be able to put this on. In terms of the music, you just press play on your sound system. So remarkably easy to do. So we're hoping that someone's going to pick that up, and then we'll get that staged. But also we're planning on putting that on ourselves in St. Ives in the Corn Exchange. We've got a slot next year, hopefully later on in the year, because I'm not quite ready yet to put that on for a few days.
Excellent.
So we're looking for cast and crew, because you've just got a couple of writers here. Like, you know, we've written the words and the music, but we don't really feel like we can act it or direct it. So again, it's trying to find local talent. I mean, sadly, the local theatre group, which might have just slotted in with us, sort of disbanded a few years ago, and the people in it are scattered to the four winds. So there's not that. And like some towns that always have a group you can just go to and talk to about it. St. Ives doesn't have that at the moment, so we will have to go around and you know, just make contacts piecemeal and get something together.
Isn't it strange that local writers have written a musical, and St. Ives had SIMADs for 50, 60 years, and they only disbanded in the last 3 or 4. So
bad timing.
Bad timing. But you know, I'm sure that we'll be able to find someone listening to this that will go, "Oh, that's for us." So that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, it is. What we're not really specific about where it's set, but in my mind, it feels a bit like it was originally called, the working title was actually called Home County. For me, it struck me as being a little bit like Surrey or Hampshire or something like that. You know, those leafy suburbs outside of London where people twitch their neck curtains and are, you know, say socially conservative and emotionally repressed. But we actually didn't want it to be that specific in the end. And you know what? There's places like that in Newcastle, outside Newcastle. There's places in Cheshire, outside of Manchester. And to be honest, I don't know the cultures well enough, but there are probably places, this is probably a human thing. There are probably places like this outside of any other culture in any other country. So, you know, you could make very small tweaks to the script to put it anywhere in the world even. So like whoever's listening to this to you now and is kind of interested and think, well, yeah, but we're set in Perth or Sydney or whatever. It doesn't even, not even a Western culture. There might be something in there for you. And deliberately we wrote the script so that anything like that wouldn't require much in the way of change, if at all, to reset it anywhere you liked. Because, you know, some of these themes of generational gaps, and our fifth character, who isn't in the family, is a bit of an outsider. And like every society has its people who are in and people who are out. So we can hopefully, you know, anyone can kind of find an angle on that and put that on. Yeah, so that's quite exciting. But I haven't actually written much in the way of a single word on that for a while. It's all a bit admin at the moment with this one. But I was a little bit busy on that. And I was, like I said, I sort of post-COVID, I was very, very tired. So I turned to poetry, because I thought, you know what, I couldn't even do a chapter. I could probably write a poem, you know. I'm not saying poetry's easier, because it isn't, but it's sort of like more manageable in my head to do. Okay, this is just a few lines. I can maybe manage those. And so I did. I sort of gear change in my head and started writing poems, which was quite a different experience to writing lyrics, which I did back in my 20s. Quite different. It's interesting, but I wanted it to, for me, the poetry was a performance poetry. So I've not collected them, I've not written them down, and not thinking at the moment of putting them in a book collection. So they're all on YouTube as a performance. And actually, Chris, my collaborator with the musical, he's done a lot of the music for them. So there's some bit of background music. So I was sort of inspired by poets like Kay Tempest. Beautifully put music behind it. Doesn't make it a song. It's all about the words and the delivery of the words, but the music sort of backs that up. And we working together on that. And I've done a couple of them myself on my own. That was a great experience. And so they're there to be listened to rather than read for me. I probably would give up on that and put them in a book eventually when I've got enough of them. I've got enough for a 20-minute set. But again, there's a point to all those. I wanted it to be a look into, you know, humanizing people like I did in the books, you know, and bringing out certain very sort of issues in a little way, subtle way in them. There's a point to each one, you know, and there should be something to think about in each one.
And these are all on YouTube now.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So what we'll do is we'll put the links to your website where people, if they are interested in the musical, can get in touch. And we'll put the links to your YouTube so that they can go off and look at your.
Yeah, there's a tab for each of the sort of projects I'm doing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm hoping so next year. Yeah, I mean, we'll put the music on. I would like to double the poetry set that I've got, and when I find that idea that's going to propel the third book, I will get onto that as well. So there's more to come, a lot more to come. But I'll have to just do it at the right pace. And I found a bit. I've sort of changed my working routine, so I've got a bit more time and hopefully energy for it. And I'm looking forward to 2023 as some, like an opportunity to get back in the saddle and start writing some more, because there's a lot more stories to tell. There's a lot more stories in there. I've got to get them out. Get them out.
Well, I look forward to it because your first two novels and every other poem and everything that I've read of yours has always been hugely entertaining and poignant and has got gravitas. So when I read your books, it's one of those delights because it's funny, it's poignant, and it makes you think, and it can be sad and it can be funny within the space of a page. So, here's hoping to the third one.
Thank you. I mean, that is absolutely what I aim to do. So it's very nice when someone gets it. So I'm grateful for that. Thanks, Ian.
No worries, man. Now, we usually try and end with a series of quick-fire questions.
Mm-hmm.
So are you up for these?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Author of the Red Line novel series and the musical Let's Call a Meeting and various YouTube poems. What's your favourite book?
It's definitely by Kurt Vonnegut, and I guess Slaughterhouse-Five is the obvious one. It could be Breakfast of Champions, but let's go for Slaughterhouse-Five. And
if you've got one, what is your least favourite?
Yeah, I've rarely not finished a book. Well, even if I've not enjoyed it, I'll read it, But I could not get through Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Really couldn't deal with that. And I was very happy when I put that down and gave up.
Emotionally or creatively, what turns you on?
Empathy.
And conversely, what turns you off?
Cruelty, needless cruelty. Punching down at a group or an issue I don't like that.
Okay. Summer or winter?
I'm going to be, it's actually spring and autumn, both together, wrapped up. I just like that in between bit. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Mine's autumn. I completely concur with you. On a completely free day to do anything you want, who do you spend it with?
I would spend it with my dogs and then go to the pub and see my friends.
Nice work. Mountains or oceans?
Mountains, close.
What is your favourite movie?
That's too difficult. That will change all the time. Oh, goodness me. Probably the movie I've watched the most, and only because it's just a little happy. I'm not saying it's the best movie by any means, but I've seen The Fifth Element loads of times because it's just this joyous bit of fun. One of my friends said to me that it's style over substance, and I went, yeah, and that's great. and it's just there's probably another film that has moved me more deeply than that, without a doubt. But it's just sometimes when I need cheering up and just escaping for a couple of hours. The Fifth Element is the one.
I mean, what's not to like about an opera singing alien with tentacles and tubes?
You got that reference, then you know the one I mean.
For anybody that doesn't get that reference, they're going to have to Google it. Now, speaking of music, what one song to listen to for the rest of your life?
That would be Carolyn's Fingers by the Cocteau Twins, because it's just so breathtakingly beautiful, but also crescendo, the guitars in crescendo, Elizabeth Fraser's vocals, and it's just and there's no lyric to it. She sings in a different mad language, so almost you can like put any words that might fit your moment onto that, and it always hits the spot, that one.
And who makes you laugh the most?
who makes probably Eddie Izzard, I think. His delivery, Wild Flights of Fancy, but also he has a strong sense of empathy and no cruelty about him at all, like we were saying before. He's just, he hits the spot. Yeah, superb.
Good work. What smell do you love?
The fur of my dog or cat at the time. I think there's one particular cat I had called Jerry, and she just, you could smell her, and it wasn't an obvious smell. It was just beautiful. I still remember that now. Yeah.
And what smell do you hate?
What smell do I hate? Well, that'll be something like, I was going to say pineapple, but then, if someone had spewed a pineapple, that would probably be worse. So, yeah. So, probably sort of pineapple vomit would probably be the top of the list in that case.
That's specific.
That's a bit.
Other than a writer, what profession would you like to attempt?
Ooh, do you know what? I've never actually found anything else that I'm quite kind of keen on. But, I was in a band for a bit. And I really did enjoy that, and being up on stage. And I'm doing a little bit of that with the poetry now. So, yeah, I guess I'd like to be a singer-songwriter. Even at my age, I'd quite like to do that again. Yeah.
Okay. And what profession would you not like to do?
Do you know what? Actually, anything that was public facing, like retail or in a shop or something, because then I just come across. I love people, but when you're in control about who you can meet and who you don't have to interact with, that's perfect. But when you've got some sort of public facing world where you don't and you have to interact with everybody, I wouldn't like that.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I would like to hear him say, "This is still a work in progress. We're all learning here."
Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, mate. Good luck with the projects for next year, and good luck with the musical, and all things being well, I'll see you in a few months when I'm over in Cambridgeshire.
Fantastic. And we'll have a beer in the pubs in which I wrote those books.
I look forward to it, and not just maybe the sweet spot of 2.
No, there's more. There's more. Yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you then.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks very much, man.
Great chat.
Hi, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more readings and author interviews. And don't forget to hit that button to be notified every time we post new content.